if anyone happens to be following the sort of arc of these videos, you'll know that one of the things that really interests me is the history of ideas, and not just ideas themselves, but how those ideas play out, how they actually have these practical implications. And one of the things that's always really interested me too is political thought, especially political philosophy. And of course, since we always haven't had this modern parliamentary democracy that's maybe no more than 300 or so years old, it's an interesting question to ask, well, what came before that? And I actually happened to find this on Amazon several years ago, and read it a couple of years ago. It's by a scholar by the name of Quentin Skinner, who is the Regius Professor of Modern History at Cambridge. And the book is actually volume 2 of the Foundations of Modern Political Thought. It's called volume 2, The Age of Reformation, even though it does go well before the Reformation. Skinner here is mostly concerned with questions like, how did the modern concept of the state develop, especially concomitant with its peculiar accoutrement of sovereignty and power? One of the aims of Skinner's book is to answer this question in the fullest, broadest, and most meticulous way possible. Ever since St. Augustine's De Civitate Dei, which is the city of God, the Christian was urged not to pay any attention to this earthly world, but rather to focus on the everlasting blessings of the city of God. And understandably, this is hardly an exhortation for active engagement in the political sphere, right? You're supposed to look inwardly and be introspective, as opposed to actually going out there and changing this less than divine world. And it wasn't until William of Moerbek's translation of Aristotle's Politics, which he did in the 1250s, nearly a millennium later, I think Augustine wrote De Civitate Dei in the early 5th century. Could be wrong, early 5th century, I think. Nearly a millennium later, that the formal study of what Skinner calls the communicatio politica saw a formal rebirth. One of Dante's much vaunted teachers, and actually one of William's contemporaries by the name of Brunetto Latini, wrote one of the first really important political treatises of the post-Roman era, called the Books of Treasure. Latini's intellectual heirs, however, were the humanists of the 16th century, with whom Skinner's book is almost wholly concerned. Another prerequisite for the development of a modern state is its asserted independence from any external or co-equal powers, which was done when Bartolus, the 14th century humanist and jurist, and his students broke away from Justinian legalist traditions, to claim that the state was an independent association not recognizing any superior. But perhaps the most important formulation that Skinner talks about is the notion of sovereignty, which was completely foreign to medieval legal assumptions, which emphasized feudal organization and the church's ability to assert itself as an equal power to that of the state. Marsilio of Padua, writing in the early 15th century, I believe, but I could be wrong, wrote a book called Defensor Pacis, Defender of the Peace, which construed that all power, even that of the church, is secular. And this book was often seen as being one of the death knells rung against this now foreign complicity between the church and the state. Especially interesting is Skinner's careful historical analysis of the word state from the condition in which the ruler finds himself, which Skinner calls statis principis, or the general state of the nation, which he calls statis regni, to the wholly modern idea of the state as a sort of abstract, rarefied power, which is completely separated from both ruler and ruled, constituting ultimate political authority within a geographically defined region. That new definition of state, or what we think of when we think of the word state, is relatively new. For those readers whose groundings in Lutheranism and Calvinism and that whole body of theology might not be the strongest, Professor Skinner provides a really wonderful history of these ideas, especially considering that knowledge of them is completely inseparable from broader cultural and political trends that he discusses in the book. A bit of warning, though, this isn't just the light, breezy après-coup that some people may want of this period of political thought. And some people might find it really difficult. I'm really interested in it, so I enjoyed it. But it is 350 pages with another 50 or 60 pages of notes and a nice long bibliography. It's scholarly. And unless you're going to be really interested in the subject, I probably wouldn't recommend it as something you would just want to sit down and systematically read from cover to cover, even though the way he writes it does make for a nice source book if you're trying to look something up. However, considering the book's age, it was published 37 years ago, in 1975. The pretty humbly named The Foundations of Modern Political Thought kind of belies the massiveness of the intellectual achievement that Quentin Skinner manages to pull off here. It's really nothing less than the best intellectual synthesis of 16th century theology, Reformation ideology, and political theory that I think I've ever read. But really a pretty spectacular book. This is volume 2 of Quentin Skinner's The Foundations of Modern Political Thought, The Age of Reformation.